Hey, welcome back to Gold Scratch. So timing is everything, and this is one of probably the hottest summer on history. Even up here in Canada, it's over 30 degrees Celsius every day. What the heck is that? If you're south of the border or anywhere else that uses Fahrenheit degrees, that's over 90 degrees almost every single day. And recently, Alec and I were golfing. We met somebody who had a beautiful big block 68 Chevelle, and they showed me a picture of it, and they said, "Oh, it's beautiful. I've never seen it around." And what I was told was, don't drive it in the summer because it's too hot, and they can't. They've done everything possible to fix the problem, and it still overheats, so they just don't drive it. Well, if you're familiar with that concept, or you're sitting in traffic on a hot summer day like this, watching your temperature gauge go up, and you're trapped, you can't do anything about it, because your engine's overheating, stick with me. I got a whole bunch of suggestions that will probably help. And the other thing is, another saying that we use is in industry, no more or less than you need. If your engine runs cool and you don't have a problem, you don't have an issue, you don't need to change anything. But if you have a problem, you better address it, because you're going to burn your engine down, and that won't be fun. So a car engine is a device that converts chemical energy, which is the fuel, the energy in the fuel and the air combined, because the oxygen is in the air, takes that chemical energy, converts it to two things. Mechanical energy through combustion. Big part of it pushes that piston down and gets your engine going, and that's what delivers the horsepower. But the other thing it does, it converts it to heat and frictions. And so typically on a 400 horsepower engine, out of a pound of fuel, you'll generate 400 horsepower mechanical energy to the flywheel and 942 horsepower in heat energy that just goes out to the atmosphere and gets wasted. And if you want to see all the calculations, I got an Excel spreadsheet. Not everybody wants to listen to the math. I'm going to put that at the end of this video so that you can understand it, but you don't really need to. Stick with me and I'll show you why it's important. So bottom line is the pound of fuel generates more heat than it does horsepower, and you need to get rid of that heat. So energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but will change its form. So two basic principles that you need to remember when you're doing anything about improving the coolant is heat transfer is equal to delta T times the flow. Delta T is the temperature, the high temperature minus the low temperature. For example, the hot water going into your radiator minus the temperature it's in the radiator times the flow. So you need to maximize two things. You need to maximize the water flow, the coolant flow. Why did I say water? Water is the best coolant. Nothing is better than water, regardless of what all the advertising tells you. And for heat transfer, water is the best. Times airflow. You also need to maximize the airflow. So the coolant goes into your engine, gathers up the heat, delivers it back to the radiator. Now the radiator's job is to reject that heat into the atmosphere, and therefore it needs the maximum airflow through that radiator to do that. Sounds pretty obvious, but the application of it is not as simple as it sounds. So let's start with a couple things. I'm going to give a credit here. I made a similar video sometime in the last year, in the wintertime, I think. And a good viewer sent me some information. Stewart Water Pumps has a great website. They make high performance water pumps, of course, and they have a great website, and some of the data, some of the information that I'm giving you here comes out of that. You can check it out yourself under the heading tips in Stewart Water Pumps. So the water pump, and I'm going to back off a little bit. We're looking here at Mike's race engine. I made a video. In fact, the last video we made, we dynoed this engine. It made 535 horsepower. It had a season of racing on it, and it ran a little bit hot. 220 degrees at race stat. Now 220 degrees is not going to ruin your engine, but 180 to 200 is better. So I did a bunch of things to get that temperature down. So one of the things, I'm going to cover them all off at the end just to kind of summarize. But one of the things right off the bat, because that's what we're talking about, is water pumps. The water pump should turn as fast as your engine. So as you can see, this one doesn't. The pulley on the bottom is smaller than the pulley on the top. Therefore, it's underdriven. People do that because they think they're saving horsepower. I didn't install this pulley, by the way. And if all the things I've already done don't get the temperature down under 200 degrees, that pulley is going to be changed to one that's at least as big as this pulley. So pretty simple. You can do the math, but if your bottom pulley's as big or bigger than the top pulley, your water pump's going to be turning as fast as your crankshaft, and that's optimal. There is a maximum RPM for a water pump, around 7,000 RPM. So if you're going higher than that, then maybe you need to underdrive your water pump a little bit. But this engine doesn't go over 7,000, and therefore that's the last thing that we'll do to improve that. So we'll come back to a summarize on this engine later. So underdriving water pumps is not recommended. A water pump only takes a couple horsepower, first of all, 2 to 3 horsepower at 4,000 RPM, maybe a little bit more at higher RPM. But the savings you'll get by your engine will make more power if it's colder too, by the way. Okay, so remember that as well. The next thing is radiator caps. The radiator cap looks like a pretty simple device, but it's not really. It does two things. The radiator cap will open and relieve when there's excess pressure in the system. And the next thing it'll do is when the engine temperature cools down, you're going to actually have a suction or a negative pressure inside your radiator, and that cap will open on the other side and allow water to flow back into the radiator so that you never lose your water level through a radiator. And most modern cars have a device that connects to an overflow tank so that you remotely fill it, for one thing, and the next thing is you always have water flow back into the radiator when the engine cools down. Our original cars back in the day, I'm going to show you my Camaro, did not have that. I've added that, and I'm going to show you that in this video. So radiator caps, here's another principle. The higher the pressure, the faster the heat's going to transfer. So you should have a radiator cap as high as your system can accommodate. If your radiator and your engine are tight enough, you can increase your cap. If your cap's 15 psi and you put a 30, 20 or 25 psi cap on it, that higher pressure, if your engine reaches a higher pressure, will conduct heat faster than at low pressure. Race car radiators are typically 25, 22, 25 psi, and high performance radiator is good for probably about 30 psi. So something in that range, getting your system pressure up higher will conduct heat more efficiently than at low pressure. So a radiator cap is obviously a safety valve as well. So your system will increase the pressure from ambient to maximum temperature about 16 to 18 psi. So typically, 20-pound cap usually will cover it, but you may have more. So radiators, talk about radiators. A cross-flow radiator is more efficient than a down-flow radiator. Most modern cars have a cross-flow radiator, and we're going to get to the Camaro in a minute and show you that. It does a couple things. The water comes in typically on the driver's side of the car, transfers to the passenger side. So the cap is now located on the passenger side, and you got your water pump trying to suck water out of the radiator, so it's at low pressure. So a couple things. That reduces the amount of opportunity for the cap to pop and let fluid out. And also, by the time the fluid gets to where the cap is, it's more easy for the air to separate from the water. So if your cap pops, it's going to pop air pressure instead of pumping fluid out of it. So we'll show you that when we give you the example. So cross-flow radiators work better. Now there's lots of, especially heritage cars that have downflow radiators because that was the style in the early days, okay? If it works for you, that's fine. And that can work as well, but a cross-flow radiator will work better. Okay, thermostats. So Stuart does not recommend using a restrictor. A thermostat is a restriction. There are high-performance thermostats. I'll show you to you now, I guess. That is the restrictor that was in Mike's engine when he got it back. It sits right down in there, and that's a very, very common thing. Most racers use a restrictor because the theory is that it will keep the water in the engine longer and transfer more heat. And not everybody agrees with this. Brian Salter and I are good friends. We don't agree on this. It's okay, Brian. This is my point of view. Restrictor will reduce the amount of cooling. So I've taken that restrictor out. If you have to run a thermostat, that's what a thermostat looks like. There are high performance. This is 160 degree. The bottom of the thermostat usually has the temperature that it relieves at. So all it does, there's a little device in there. When it gets hot, it'll open up and let water flow by. So the real purpose of a thermostat is thermostat doesn't, first of all, doesn't regulate the maximum temperature your engine is going to get at. If it's a 160 degree thermostat, all that means is the thermostat's going to open when the water gets to 160 degrees. If it wants to go to 200 degrees, it's going to keep on going. It's just mainly there to reduce the flow during warm-up so that your engine can warm up faster, because when it keeps water in the engine longer, it transfers heat faster and warms up quicker. So that's what a thermostat's for. So there are high-performance thermostats if you have to use one, or what a lot of guys do, depending on what bypass they have, they drill 3/16 holes in the thermostat that allows some water to flow all the time, whether the thermostat's open or not. Now, when you do that, you're going to delay the time it takes for your engine to heat up, but you're also going to make sure you're never going to cavitate the pump. The whole idea of doing that is to make sure the pump never cavitates, and that's why there's water pump bypasses on most engines. So fans. So one of the things I did with Mike's engine when basically what happened, he bought the modified race car, I built the engine, they put it in the car and installed it the way it was before. It had a mechanical fan on it. So as you can see, I've installed an alternator because a lot of modified guys, a lot of short track guys run on a battery that just drains the battery. They don't use an alternator. If they have a mechanical fan, they don't really need one. Once your engine is running, it's not taking much power to keep it running. So I've added an alternator to Mike's engine and taken the mechanical fan off. So now he's going to have to install an electric fan. And the electric fan should always be installed on the engine side of the radiator so that it's pulling air through the radiator, not trying to push air through the radiator. So he's going to have to do that, obviously, because he won't have any other source of cooling. The other thing about a mechanical fan at 7,000 RPM takes 15 to 20 horsepower for it to pump. And if you do have a mechanical fan, some kinds of racing, dirt racing for example, mechanical fan is necessary for a bunch of reasons. All the air that's coming through that radiator should be shrouded and captured by the fan. So if any air is allowed to escape, in this case the fan's just sitting there circulating air under the hood and not really pulling it through the radiator. So that's one of the other things that we did. So electric fan's better than mechanical fan. There are better electrical fans. You can do your own homework on that, but any kind of electrical fan is better. Should always be on the engine side. So hoses. Here's another thing. So when the engine was in the car, as you can see, the fitting is still here. They had an AN style stainless steel top rad hose to the radiator. That's very, very common. Most race guys use those setups. That is not recommended because the inside diameter of those AN hoses is smaller and it's restrictive. The standard rubber OEM style black hoses actually will flow water better, and you want to have, remember, go back to what I started at the beginning, right? Maximum airflow and maximum water flow, so all the time. So this is on here for shipping, but he's going to have to install a typical setup with a OEM, a water neck, and OEM water hose. So how thick should your radiator be? Thicker radiators are better than thin radiators. Now there is a little bit of a trade-off because the thicker the radiator gets, the more heat is conducted away before it gets to the back of the radiator. But a 4-inch radiator isn't twice as good as a 2-inch thick radiator, but it's almost. The loss is only about 10%. And modern radiators, the channels through the radiator are much more efficient for getting water to the outside where they can transfer heat. And for that reason, if you need more cooling, adding a thicker radiator is going to help you. Okay. So in a typical engine, I think I got this from Stuart, and I was a little bit surprised. The temperature, delta T across the radiator, let's say the water is coming in the radiator at 190 degrees. It's only going out at about 180 degrees. It only takes about 10 degrees of heat out of that coolant going through the engine. But that's made up by flow because it's the delta T times the flow, right? So the flow in a high-performance water pump can be 180, 150, 180 gallons per minute. That's like a fire hose. Basically, you can compare that to a fire hose. Amount of water that's being forced through your engine. So even though the delta T is not great, it makes up for it by the flow. I mentioned coolant before. Once again, water is the best coolant. If you have to use antifreeze, as we call it, and up north here, of course, we do, use just enough to prevent your engine, the coolant in your engine, from freezing in the wintertime. That would be even more disastrous. It does happen. I've seen it lots. But use just enough to prevent freezing. The higher the concentration of water versus coolant, the better your engine is going to transfer heat. Back to radiator caps. The other thing is a high pressure cap will do is, if it increases the pressure inside your cooling system, it increases the boiling point. So the boiling point of water is 212 degrees at atmospheric pressure. So PSI G, in other words, the G stands for gauge, pounds per square inch gauge pressure above atmosphere. So at 10 PSI, the boiling point is 239 degrees. At 20, it's 259. I'm referring to my notes here. And at 30 PSI, it's 273 degrees. So even if your coolant's getting hot, as long as it's still a liquid, it's still conducting heat away. Now, the higher the temperature, the less efficient that it's conducting heat away, but it's still conducting heat away. So if you have a higher pressure cap and your temperature does go up, it's making sure that coolant is staying a liquid. Once it turns to a gas, which is steam when it boils, it's not anymore. So you want to make sure that you do that. So that's the other advantage of a high pressure cap. Back to maximizing airflow. So the grill opening that's feeding the air into this engine should be at least a third of the size of the cross-sectional area of your radiator. So if your radiator's, say, 20 by 20, that's 400 square inches, easy math, okay? And your opening in your grill that feeds that should be at least a third. And the logic behind that is the opening of where air flows through your radiator, where it's not filled with the tubes and all that stuff, is about a third of the cross-sectional area. So you want as much air coming into the car as can pass through the radiator. So, okay. So one other thing I haven't mentioned, and even Stuart did mention, tuning of your engine. If you have your timing excessively advanced or retarded, it can increase the temperature, operating temperature of your engine for obvious reasons. So I should state that, because if you're not sure that's right, check your timing. It's a more minor effect, your airflow ratio, your jet sizes and all that stuff. Your engine should be in tune, let's put it that way. But excessive timing, either advanced or retarded, can also contribute to the problem. So I think we're getting... Okay, so let's just cover off a couple things that I did. For Mike's engine, once again, it was 220 degrees last year. I want him to race at less than 200 degrees. So he's going to change that steel braided hose to a rubber hose. Probably will end up increasing the size of this pulley to run the water pump as fast as the engine. Going to go to electric fan versus a mechanical fan. And I also did this is another sort of controversial issue. I did this for the dyno. This is just a temporary job. This is this heater hose, but it works just fine because it can easily take 20 or 30 psi. So this manifold wasn't drilled. I drilled and tapped the manifold for fittings and pumped water from the back to the front of the engine. And here's the reasoning behind that. And it only applies to engines that have aluminum heads. Aluminum heads are great. Aluminum is lighter than steel. You gain lots. Your car loses weight if you have aluminum heads. But because aluminum is not as strong, the cross-sectional area of the aluminum in the chambers where the water is flowing is less. The area for water to flow is less because the aluminum is thicker. So the logic behind that with aluminum heads is by flowing more water from the back to the front quicker, you will increase that flow. I did a bunch of tests. I had gauges on here at one time. I didn't learn anything, to be honest with you. But I'm going to go with it. I'm going to leave the hoses on, and Mike will race with them. The logic kind of makes sense. I don't think it's a big deal either way. So those are the things that we did. Now I'm going to go over to the Camaro and show you a couple things. Valley can follow me over here. So this car, this is my Camaro. That's this 6Z CT400 ZZ6 crate engine, basically. Ironically, I build engines, but I didn't really build this one. So it was so good, I just left it alone. I dynoed it. It made 453 horsepower. So I said there's no point in taking it apart. So let's look at some of the things that work for it. It does have a thermostat, 160 degree thermostat. It has OEM style rubber hoses. If you look down at the pulleys, this is just a March pulley system that I bought for it, serpentine system. It's just the way it came. There's the bottom pulley, and the bottom pulley is obviously much bigger than the top pulley. So it's pushing that, running that water pump faster than the engine. So I'm guessing that at 5,000 RPM, the water pump's probably going 7,000 RPM. So that works. I have a radiator, taking the mechanical fan off, and it's not a big fan, it's just a single fan. Sometimes guys use two fans. And the fan has to be on the engine side to improve cooling, not on the other side to draw air through it. The other thing I've added is, most modern cars have one, but I've added an overflow tank. So when the engine gets hot, the radiator cap, and as you see, it is a cross-flow radiator. So because it's a cross-flow radiator, the water pump is trying to create suction here. So this is actually low pressure side of the radiator. So if the radiator cap does pop, it's just going to pop air because the air and water are going to separate in the side of the tank, on the side tank. Okay. If it does, it's going to eject some water through this hose. And then back in '68, when this car was built, that hose just went out to the ground and the water went to the ground. But now I've installed a little overflow tank into it right here. So that water goes to the bottom of this overflow tank, and that tank's about half filled. And so what happens next is, if it does get hot and it pumps some water into the tank, when it cools down, and the cap is tight. Now you're going to have a suction inside of your tank. It's going to want to draw that water back in, and this, as I said, the cap's more complicated than it looks. It actually opens and allows the water to be drawn back into the radiator. And if you have a modern vehicle, basically I'm pretty sure they're all designed that way right from OEM. That's nothing you have to worry about. But if you have a hot rod, you typically don't have that, and if you do get hot, you're probably going to eject a little bit of water. So having said all that, this engine runs between 180 and 200 degrees. Hottest day of the year. I can sit in traffic at a light for 5 minutes. I have the control I have on the fan now is a mechanical fan button that it'll have under the dash, and I almost never turn the fan on. That fan almost never runs. If I'm sitting for right now today, long time in traffic, it might get over 200. It's not going to go to 250, but it might go to 210 or maybe 220. I will turn that fan on. Not something I recommend for you unless you're very conscientious and you don't let anybody else drive your car, because if somebody forgets, you could have a problem. I'm watching the temperature all the time, and if the temperature gets high, I will turn that on. And so even with all that, one of the reasons I think it does work is that pump is probably turning almost twice as fast as the crankshaft is. So for that reason, cooling is not a problem, and that maybe give you some ideas about how you can improve your cooling. Please like and subscribe. I'm going to stop. I'm going to add at the end. I'm going to add a little explanation of the sort of the thermodynamics of it for you. We haven't made a video for about a month for a whole bunch of reasons. I got lots of stuff waiting. There's David Bougie's 427. I'm waiting on Bill to port the heads. Bill, are you watching? So if Bill gives me the heads back, this thing's going back. We also have a custom camshaft ordered for it. This is the blueprint engines that we bought, according to blueprint, 542 horsepower. We're going to try and take that a lot closer to 600 horsepower with a custom design cam and flowing and porting the cylinder heads, and that's waiting on Bill. The shiny manifold, people have asked me what happened to the 340. Well, that's Blakely wanted her, even though that's an Elderbrock RPM air gap manifold, she wanted it orange. So I've got it already, and the short block's not in sight right now. It's ready to go back together, and I'm waiting on, what's his name again? Bill Little to flow my head. So are you watching, Bill? So not trying to put pressure on you or anything, but so that engine, this engine is going to the dyno on the 6th of September. That's less than 4 weeks away. So watch for that, and then I'm going to start back up and show you the kind of the thermodynamics of this. So, okay, for those that are interested, this is at the end of the cooling video. I'm going to give you a little bit of calculation of sort of the thermodynamics that goes into an engine. Thermodynamics is basically heat transfer. So let's start with a simple fact. A pound of fuel has 19,000 BTUs, British thermal units. And the metric unit for that is a calorie, by the way. Okay, so a British thermal unit is the amount of energy it takes to raise the temperature of 1 gallon of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. So this has got 19,000 of them, 19,000 BTUs in a pound of fuel. A gallon of fuel has 125,000. Let's not get that. I put that up here as well. So a gallon of fuel has 125,000 BTUs. A pound has 19,000 BTUs. So 19,000 BTUs can produce, is equivalent to 7.46 horsepower for 1 hour. In other words, if your engine was 100% efficient and it didn't have generate any heat, and all of the energy from the fuel went into turning that crankshaft, you can make 7.46 horsepower for 1 hour. Okay, so one of the main things, if you watch our dyno videos that we look at a lot, is a brake-specific fuel consumption, which is the amount of fuel it takes to make 1 horsepower for 1 hour. And just a little sidebar, I know we get a lot of comments of fuel-air ratio on our dyno, and let me try to, I know Daryl's tried to explain this a few times. Daryl's dyno does not have an oxygen sensor, so we are not measuring air-fuel ratio with an oxygen sensor. So the numbers that you see in the printouts are not necessarily accurate. So what we use is brake-specific fuel consumption, which was the standard of measuring and still is for lots of engines. And you put that together with your spark plug reading and wherever we make the maximum horsepower, and you got the right combination. Most horsepower we produce is what's important, more than fuel and air ratio. But once again, I'm just repeating it, I know. The fuel and air ratio numbers that you see on our dyno sheets are based on a calculation of the flow of fuel and the flow of air, not from an oxygen sensor. And that's why we don't really pay a lot of attention to them. So a little bit of sidebar for you. So let's get back to the subject at hand. So a horsepower will, 1 pound of fuel then, all the energy in a pound of fuel is equivalent to 7.46 horsepower for 1 hour. So a good number on our dyno, if you look at the dyno sheets, is about 0.450 brake-specific fuel consumption. In other words, it takes about 0.450 pounds of fuel to make 1 horsepower for 1 hour. So I just said back here that a pound of fuel should make 7.46 horsepower, okay? So if you do the math on it, okay, 0.450 is equivalent to 3.357. So if I do the math and divide by 3.357, the engine efficiency then is 29.79%. And we'll put a screenshot of this up in the end for you if you want to check my calculations. 29.79%. So all the rest of that energy and that fuel is going to noise, friction, and heat. Okay? So I think I quoted this in the video, if the engine makes 400 horsepower of mechanical horsepower, the equivalent is 942 horsepower, which goes up into heat, like friction, heat, noise, and friction. Sorry. So hope that makes a little bit of sense. Now, 0.450 is kind of a mean number that we use. Mike's engine was 0.427. The lower the number, the better, because it's a measure of the engine's efficiency. Pounds of fuel per horsepower hour. So the less it takes, the more efficient your engine is, and that's what you're aiming for. NASCAR engines, for example, are 0.38, 37 or so. I'm not exactly sure in that range. Definitely less than 3. A Formula One engine is lower than that anyway. I better not quote a number, but it's lower than that because fuel efficiency is extremely important in any kind of a race car. So hopefully this helps to understand the background of our thinking and not only how we dyno and how we cool our engines. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe. You know, we're getting really close to 30. I'll measure it. Really close. Alex starting to smile at him here. Really close to a couple things. We're close to 30,000 subscribers. This is the 299th video, so we're getting close to 300 videos. And on total views, we're actually getting close to 4 million views. And speaking of views, I want to give a shout out to Ben Almeida Racing, a fellow YouTuber. I think he's in California. Really smart guy, and especially if you're a Ford guy, that's kind of his specialty. I think he knows a lot more than that, but you don't see too many Fords in my channel, and not that I don't like them, just nobody's asking me to build them, but Ben does, and he's very good at it. Very, very successful drag racer. He just made a thank you video when he reached 2 million views. So if you're a YouTuber, you live every day by how your views are going. So congratulations to Ben. Let's leave it at that. And thank you for watching Gold Scratch.